for tonight's program on the topic of responding to hate and bias in schools. We're pleased to have with us tonight Alicia Brooks, who is the Director of Outreach of the Southern Poverty Law Center, who I'll introduce in a few minutes. First, I want to thank the Temple for hosting tonight's event, and I'd like to welcome Rabbi Mark Shifton to welcome all of you to the Temple. Rabbi Shifton.
We are so honored that many of you came out here on a dark and rainy night, braving either the West End corridor or one of the other back roads here. We're very, very proud to host this event. We forged a very interesting road over the last couple of years in the greater Nashville community and in the Jewish community on the way in which we talk, agree, or agree to disagree with civility and with respect for every human being and for the human dignity and worth of every human being. Whenever people gather to affirm that sense of worth and dignity, if you'll forgive me a little bit of religion, we feel that God is in this place. That's this week's Torah portion. Jacob wakes up, he says, God was in this place, and I didn't know it. We have the chance to know it. When we gather together peacefully to share issues of common concern, we hold the darkness at bay. And I don't mean the darkness of a rainy night. I mean the darkness that bullies and intimidates others simply because they believe differently than them, though they live peacefully with their neighbor and encourage others to do so. So, to our members who are involved with the Family of Abraham events, and to all of you, we welcome you here to our temple. It is a house of prayer and gathering for all peoples. We're honored to hear you this evening, our panelists and our speaker. We're glad that you all have braved the West End corridor to make it here, and we're glad all of you are here as well this evening. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Rabbi Shifton. Before we get started, I'd like everybody to please find your cell phone and either turn it off or put it on mute. And as in our previous programs, if you have a question for our speaker, please write your question legibly on the 3x5 card that you should have found on your seat. Raise your hand, and one of our committee members will pick up your card and provide them to me later on during the evening. The Family of Abraham is an interfaith group which believes that the differences among us are based upon our respective faith traditions are best addressed by increasing our knowledge of each other and engaging in personal dialogue. Towards that end, the Family of Abraham has sponsored and or supported programs over the past 2 years which have addressed questions about our Muslim neighbors and interfaith relations. Our past programs have been primarily addressed to the concerns and interests of adults. Tonight, we turn our focus on the interests and concerns of school-age children and their parents. Clearly, if we're going to promote understanding among adults, we need to start with how our children are raised, how they are aware of challenges they face, and how they can address and how can we assist them as they move through adolescence to adulthood. This evening's speaker is Alicia Brooks. She will introduce the work of the Southern Poverty Law Center and then share with us what can be done and is being done to respond to hate and bias in our schools. Also with us tonight to respond to Ms. Brooks' remarks and offer their own observations are Berthina Nava McKinney, Director of the Nashville International Academy, Jeannie Pupu Walker, Executive Director of the Department of Family and Community Partnerships of the Metropolitan Public Schools, and Tom Ward, President and Chief Executive Officer of Oasis Center and former Executive Principal at both East Literature Magnet High School and Fog Magnet High School here in Nashville. Again, we will collect questions from you twice during tonight's presentation. Once after Ms. Brooks speaks, and again after our panel's response. If you have a question, write it legibly on a 3x5 card, raise your hand, and give your question to one of the members of our organizing committee who will be walking through the chapel. Now, to our speaker. We're pleased to have with us tonight Leisha Brooks, Director of Outreach for the Southern Poverty Law Center. She is responsible for the Southern Poverty Law Center's Teaching Tolerance program and speaks frequently on how to promote tolerance and diversity. Please join me in welcoming Leisha Brooks.
Good evening, everyone. Is it on? Is it working? Okay. Thank you so much for hosting this event. Where's Rabbi? Thank you. Thank you for having me in your temple. It's beautiful. And all the members of the congregation, thank you for opening up the temple to this event. I'm honored, really honored to be here. I want to thank Iris. Where's Iris? I think so. We just met moments ago, but we started speaking months ago when she told me about the family of Abraham. And you should know that she speaks with great fondness about this group. And she was very insistent that I come. So she'll tell you I did try to get out of it, but I'm really am happy to be here. I'm happy to know, quite frankly, that you have an organization or a group such as this that comes together to talk about issues across groups and across difference. And you're finding ways to recognize similarities. And Rabbi, I really like the Torah portion for the week that God was here and we didn't know it. That's the way I'm going to paraphrase it. That was beautiful. Thank you. Okay. How many members of the Southern Poverty Law Center do we have in the audience tonight? Thank you. It is really them you should thank for me being here, because really you make it possible for me to come. And to my esteemed panelists, let me apologize up front because I'm already over time. I was told I typically speak for about an hour, and I like to talk about our work. And then I was told, no, it better be 30 minutes. You'll be lucky if it's 45. Just tell me to stop. Just tell me to stop.
Watch out for the hook.
And I do, since I'm sharing the work of the Southern Poverty Law Center, where we cover a wide range of issues, I'm really happy that the panelists are here to discuss the specifics of teaching tolerance, promoting tolerance, and working against hate in your local schools. Because that's the secret. I mean, we don't have all the answers in Montgomery, Alabama. We have some, but we don't have all the answers. But you have experts here on the ground. Okay, let's get to it. The Southern Poverty Law Center was founded in 1971. Can you all see? Can you see, honey? Ma'am?
No. I can turn the lights off. Okay.
Yes. I told them it's much more dramatic with the lights off. Ooh, yeah. Okay, now you can see. Now you can see Morris and Joe. The Southern Poverty Law Center was founded in 1971 by these two men. I'd like to point out, and I always point out, that they're two white men. And it's important, really is important, to have founded an organization in Montgomery, Alabama, to be at the age they are. That's Morris Dees on the left and Joe Levin on the right. Joe is 70, Morris is 76. That tells you that they were born and raised in the Jim Crow South in Montgomery, Alabama, and went on to found an organization called the Southern Poverty Law Center, whose mission is to advocate on behalf of society's most vulnerable members. And at that time, it was primarily black folks and poor whites. Morris was raised in the Southern Baptist tradition, and Joe was raised in Reform Judaism. And that, too, is reason for celebration, the fact that they came together to fight bias and bigotry in the Deep South. They decided to stay in Montgomery, Alabama, because we call it the birthplace of the Civil Rights Movement, and I think for good reason. This is the place where Mrs. Parks took her stand December 1st, 1955, and refused to give up her seat on the bus, thereby launching the Civil Rights Movement across the United States. That movement began at this church, Dexter King Memorial Baptist Church. And this is the only church that Dr. King pastored. Right across the street from our offices, we derive much inspiration from this church, knowing its history. And Dr. King, I'd like to point out, Dr. King came to Montgomery, Alabama, just about almost a year before the Montgomery bus boycott. He came there to pastor a church. He did not come to lead a civil rights movement, but he was there and he was called and he answered. This is a picture of Dr. King speaking on the first night of the bus boycott. That's what they called mass meetings. They were always held in the churches. The church was the organizing spot. This happens to be Reverend Ralph Abernathy's church. Another reason why Morris and Joe decided to stay in Montgomery, Alabama is because they believed that Montgomery, they wanted to first and foremost ensure that the successes of the civil rights movement were realized for every person, and even in Alabama. And they knew that that wasn't likely to happen very easily. This is some state troopers that are posted at the base of the Evan Pettus Bridge in Selma. Four-time Governor George Wallace ordered state troopers to push back peaceful protesters on that bridge. This event was called Bloody Sunday. And Bloody Sunday was the first of 3 marches that we come to know as the Selma to Montgomery Voting Rights March. But it wasn't until the 3rd attempt that the people made it all the way to Montgomery. I like to show this picture, and I think it's particularly important to you all because what started out as a small protest led by 600 people, overwhelmingly all African American, ended up with being 25,000 people. This is their last leg of that march, marking down Dexter Avenue just past Dr. King's church. 25,000 people. It was multiracial, it was multi-ethnic, multicultural, interfaith, community of folks coming together to stand up for the rights of others. And I like to point this out to people because I just think that the lessons of the civil rights movement, or rather the activists, the martyrs, the people on the ground during the movement, should serve as an inspiration to us. They acted on behalf of others to create change, and they're no different than you or I, and we should be able to do that or continue that tradition today. So that's a little background here, really quick civil rights history. When they founded the Southern Poverty Law Center in 1971, our early cases were, again, about the state. We sued the state trooper, we sued the state, and insisted that they integrate the state trooper force as was required by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Also sued the YWCA, as was the case in a lot of southern cities, and I'm sure it happened here as well. Kind of parks and recreational facilities, instead of opening up the facilities to everyone, they would close the pool, cement over the pool, that kind of stuff. So Morris decided we should sue the YMCA. We did, we won. But it wasn't until we represented this woman, Beulah May Donald, that the Southern Poverty Law Center came to be known nationally. Mrs. Donald lived in Mobile, Alabama. In 1981, her son, Michael Donald, 19-year-old, was just coming home from work, and he was abducted by 2 men who belonged to a group called the United Klans of America. They beat him, cut his throat, and then brought him back to a neighborhood and lynched him from a tree. This was in 1981. Not too terribly long ago, 1981. And Morris, I know the image is very disturbing. This is often referred to as the last lynching. This kind of thing used to happen in our country, with great regularity. But to think that it was still happening in 1981, Morris really wanted to see something done about it. So he came up with what was then a novel legal strategy to sue the Klan leader and hold them responsible for the actions of their members. It's kind of based on RICO, organized crime law. And we won. Mrs. Donald won. An all-white jury, 1987, Mobile, Alabama, finds in favor of a black woman over the Klan. It was just a miracle. It's still a miracle. And so we decided to take that working strategy and sue other Klan organizations. This represents actually the largest judgment against a hate group or an extremist group in the country. This was a KKK group in South Carolina that was burning black churches. 100-year-old churches. And we sued them, and it was a $37.8 million judgment. I should mention that the Southern Poverty Law Center is a nonprofit organization. We don't charge people to represent them. We don't share any of the award money. And also, full disclosure, they never get all of the money. As you may know, in civil suits, you can just get all up, you can kind of try to attach all their assets up to the amount of the judgment, but you'll never get all of the money. Our strategy, or our hope, is to bankrupt the organizations and put them out of business. It's really important, going back to that first case, the Donald case against the United Klans of America. They were notorious, right? They're in the civil rights movement. They killed a woman named Viola Liuzzo, this white woman who came from Detroit to help with the movement. They bombed the Freedom Riders buses in Anniston and in Montgomery. And they also were responsible for setting the bomb that killed the 4 girls at 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham in 1963. So it was important, it's important to us to kind of make sure that they never do these things again by bankrupting them and putting them out of business. There was a group, Aryan Nation folks, that had a huge compound in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and another black woman and her son happened to, cross paths with them. Now, fortunately, no one was killed, but they were beaten, and we decided to sue them. And what was that? $6 million judgment. The good thing about that particular group was they had this huge compound that I mentioned, and Mrs. Keenan, the woman, got their compound, and now they've turned it into a peace park. The guy in the center is Ron Edwards, and this represents our most recent case, 2008. Ron Edwards led a number of groups rather, called the Imperial Klans of America. Imperial Klans of America, yes. They're not very creative, their names are all very similar. Try to keep them straight. But he had about a dozen small groups across the southeast, but this one group in Brandenburg, Kentucky, came across our client, Jordan Groover. He was 16 years old at the time, and he was just at the county fair with his friends and, doing what he did every year. Ron Edwards sent some of his henchmen to the county fair to recruit new members. They came across Jordan, look at Jordan, and tagged him as, in their words, an illegal spick, and began to beat him within an inch of his life. Jordan, for the record, his mother is white, and his father is a Kuna Indian. And he was just the sweetest little kid. So Morris found out that the guys who beat Jordan were just given 6 months, suspended sentence, slap on the wrist. So he decided to sue Ron Edwards in civil court and got a $2.5 million judgment against them. Now, we've probably had maybe 15 or so major cases against hate groups since the Donald case. And it's something we take very, very seriously. But even if we had a lawsuit every year, we would not be able to sadly not be able to end hate groups or stop all the hate groups. This is a map. This represents all the active hate groups in the United States. In addition to the civil rights and litigation, and suing Klan organizations and that kind of thing, and a number of other things, we have a project called the Intelligence Project. They track and monitor hate groups. We started this project primarily because during the course of the Donald case, another Klan group bombed our offices. And actually there have been about 30 people that have gone to prison for attempts to destroy the office or kill Morris. So we started tracking them so we can keep up with them. Also, it's a great way to marginalize hate groups. We publish a magazine, we have a blog, we share information about any elected officials and public officials who associate with groups that we call hate groups. As a matter of fact, you've probably heard about this. You had 3 elected officials, I think all state officials, who were invited to attend a group last week, a neo-Confederate group that we identify as a hate group. And we published information about that, and 2 of them backed down and didn't go. In any case, the hate map, this is 2012, 1,007 active hate groups in the United States. 1,007. And you can see there's as you would imagine, a heavy concentration in the southeast. But also note the heavy concentration in the Northeast. There's a fair number in California as well. Very, very few states have no hate groups. New Mexico is pretty good. We've been tracking groups since the year 2000 and note an alarming increase, 65%, that's pretty alarming, 65% increase in the number of active hate groups in the United States since the year 2000. And I thought it might be interesting to look at your state, Tennessee. You have 33 hate groups in Tennessee. Now, you can go to our website, and I have some information out on the table that I invite you to take when you leave. It has information on how to access the hate map. And you can go in, and I encourage you to do so, to see who your neighbors are, where they are, what they're about. When we began this tracking and monitoring hate groups, it was exclusively about the Klan, right? But we certainly recognize that the Klan is not the only hate group out there. And as a matter of fact, in no small part because of our successful suits against them, the number of Klan groups are actually declining. However, the number of other groups, like neo-Nazi groups, are increasing. And neo-Nazi groups are particularly interesting to younger people. Young people don't want to have anything to do with the Klan, quite frankly. They're typically kind of older people. They might get some young people, but the young people are very interested in neo-Naziism. They have music, they have rock music. You know, they're young, they're vibrant, but they're very, very dangerous. Neo-Nazi groups are the most dangerous and most violent of the hate groups that we track. When you go to our website, you'll also see this list, and it tells you kind of who they are. You have a number of Klan groups. You have anti-Muslim groups right here in Nashville. You have white nationalist groups, black separatist groups. That would be the Nation of Islam. We've named the Nation of Islam a hate group for quite some time because of their anti-white, anti-Semitic, and anti-gay rhetoric. Looks to be a racist skinhead and some more white nationalists. So I think you all should take a look at who's here. People often wonder, well, why? You know, it seems like things are getting better. Why the increase in the number of hate groups? And the primary reason is because the country is shifting. The demographics are shifting, which comes as no surprise intellectually, but when people experience that emotionally, it's hard sometimes. If we look at population data from 1970, the United States was about 83% white, 17% people of color. And for lots of folks, white folks, that is real comfortable. 83%, you're still in the majority, feeling really good. 17% people of color, not like a number of ethnic restaurants you can go to. You can see people, different clothes, that kind of thing. It feels lovely. But you kind of push ahead, and this is really from 2010, white population 66%, people of color 34%. That's not feeling, as comfortable as 83-17. Now it's beginning to feel like we're losing the majority of their, or as some people say in Alabama, we're being invaded. And I mean, demographers began to look at this shift. I'm originally from California, where we shifted some time ago. And you probably heard that the country they first started saying by 2050, the United States would no longer have a white majority, or whites would no longer be in the majority. And oh my gosh, now they've moved it up to 2040, and people are completely freaking out. I'm serious. Last year was a significant marker for demographers. The first year that babies of color outnumbered white babies. And that was in like popular media. So people are kind of paying attention to those articles now, and it's scaring them. But you can't change the data. The data is what the data is. And I like to dig deep into the data. And if we look at kind of the makeup or the growth in specific people of color populations, it makes sense. You may recall after the re-election of President Obama, if you watched any, I was watching cable news, but if you watched any news, then you saw the complete meltdown of the pundits over the election results, and they were all kind of scratching their head about what happened, and it dawned on them all at once, like, oh my gosh, it's the people of color. If you look, the Hispanic Latino population increased by 23%. This is since the year 2000, 43%, right? But look down, and the Asian population also increased by 43%. Look over and see that the Pacific Islander population increased by 35%. Pacific Islander, Native Hawaiian. And oftentimes, Asian and Pacific Islanders are combined. So you combine those numbers, and that's a pretty hefty majority. Asian and Pacific Islanders are the fastest growing immigrant population in the country. Not Latinos, Asians and Pacific Islanders. You combine that, 43% Latino, 43% plus on the Asian Pacific Islander, and that's how President Barack Obama was re-elected. Look at the black numbers, 12%, just a 12% increase. Not a lot, nothing to be afraid of there. We're just not growing. I think that, well, I say that the white population growth and black population growth are both pretty stagnant. They stay the same. So we're just, black population mirrors or echoes the white population. And as we begin to, more people begin to identify multiracial, biracial, it'll take even more from the black and the white population. So, and look, there's reason to be happy there. American Indian population increased by 18%. Pretty good. Looking at it kind of in aggregate, people of color population increased by 85%, white by 15%. And there you have it. And that is what people are beginning to notice. That's what fuels all this kind of anti-immigrant rhetoric. It helps fuel the Islamophobia and any number of issues that people are pushing back on. In Alabama, you may have heard, we had the most draconian, regressive immigration bill in the country, or immigration bill, yes, in the country. And thank goodness the Supreme Court overruled it. And Alabama passed this immigration bill with 4.5% immigrant population, just 4.5%, because they saw what was happening across the country in terms of quote-unquote browning of the country. Now, people don't take information, don't always accept information or change well. And I can really understand this because when I lived in California through a lot of the shifts, and it's tough, I mean, it takes something. You have to do something. You have to kind of welcome change. So oftentimes people act out, through protest signs that read to me to be kind of pretty hateful. I'm certainly all for a robust debate on immigration, but it's the rhetoric, the hateful rhetoric and messaging and the dehumanization of an entire population of people, all for the express purpose of debating immigration, that creates an increase in hate crimes that are directed towards Latinos, Hispanics, or anybody who is perceived to be that. It also adds to, as I mentioned earlier, adds fuel to the fire as it relates to Islamophobia, because certainly immigrants are not solely Hispanic, Latino, or Asian and Pacific Islander. Now these cute kids, who I think are as cute can be, are looking through the window and have no idea that somebody tagged this hateful thing on their window. This is all about go home. This whole notion of our country is for some but not others directly connects to the demographic shifts. It extends too, because as the country grows, and this is kind of what happens, people grow, people mature, and people expect that they're going to enjoy equal rights. And so when a group pushes for full citizenship, equality, there's a pushback. And so this sign, this hate graffiti. The second reason why we have an increase in the number of active hate groups is the down economy. Whenever there's a sour economy or there's kind of, a poor economy, people are suffering economically, there's an increase in hate groups and hate group activity. Because people are always looking for a scapegoat. It's always easier to say, I don't have a job because you took my job. Even though I didn't want your job. I didn't want that job. I still want to blame you because I don't have a job. No, that's what happens. And I don't mean to invalidate or make light of the fact that lots of people are suffering and continue to suffer as we come out of the recession, but not everybody is, and some people just use it as an excuse. Some people, hate groups, the National Socialist Movement, which is the largest neo-Nazi group and the largest hate group in the United States, use it as a recruiting tool. Their Jeff Shoup, who's their commandant, he likes to call commandant. When the economy suffers, people are looking for answers. We are the answers for white people. They're using the economy, and they're using President Obama as what they call visual aids, reminding and telling people, David Duke, who was a former Klan leader, who also ran for the presidency and has always been touring around Europe and always coming back to see where he can run for office, says that now they can use President Obama as a recruiting tool to say, I warned you, the country is being taken over now, it has been. What are we going to do about it? So President Obama, just being President Obama, adds to the increase in hate groups. Now, what you may ask, I thought we were talking about schools, and we are. We look at kind of hate group activity, who belongs to hate groups, what they're talking about, because that rhetoric, that information, that poison makes its way to the schools. I used to work for an organization called NCCJ, and we used to say, nobody's born a bigot, and certainly no one isn't. No one is. You, young people, get their ideas about who to respect and who to disrespect, who is worthy of humane treatment and who is not, primarily from adults, either at home, in their places of worship, or in school. And this kind of thing needs to be mitigated, or the messages that students hear need to be mitigated at school. So we created a third project of the Southern Poverty Law Center's, our Teaching Tolerance Project. Now, Morris started that project in 1991 because he began to recognize that a lot of young people were associating with hate groups, and he wanted to find a way to get a message of tolerance, acceptance, appreciation through to kids before they became susceptible to messages of hate. So we started the Teaching Tolerance program, whereby we send free resources to every school in the United States and just flood them with resource material so that the classroom teacher can be better prepared to create safe and inclusive classrooms all across the country. If kids grow up with that, then that's what they'll practice. But it doesn't always happen. It doesn't happen magically. And when school communities find that bias in hate crimes or hate incidents are playing out in their schools, they need to respond to it. And we suggest that schools respond or set up a bias response team before anything happens, because you need to be able to respond immediately. You need to tell the school community, you need to tell the students, you need to tell the extended community that we don't stand for it, and we stand against it together. So what we recommend is that you develop an incident report plan. So if anything happens, or if a student comes to you and says, I was bullied because I don't speak English, or I got a book in the library and someone had drawn a swastika on it. Anything that happens at the school needs to be responded to. It's also a fine way to collect data and information about what's going on at your school. So you create a plan and you create a media plan, because remember I said you want the students to know that that you won't stand for any hate incidents on campus, and you want the extended community to know that as well, because the school is a part of the larger community. And you want to have your plan reviewed by administrators. So a group of teachers, a group of students, develop a plan, work with your site administrators, and then extend yourself to work with your district administrators, so that all the schools in your area are on the same page about their response to hate and bias. Share your plans with the response team. Those are kind of just basics. Train all staff on the plan. Then move beyond just the group who's responding. Work with every teacher, every adult, every classified person on that campus. Everybody needs to be, all adults on the campus need to be on one accord in how they're going to respond to hate or bias incidents. And first and foremost, they want to take it seriously. Then schedule a time to review and revise. Because a plan that's just created and sits on the shelf is no good to anyone. And that was a quick down and dirty, but you can get the entire resource guide and it'll go through it again for you. In addition to writing white papers or preparing kind of documents to help teachers respond to hate and bias, we publish a magazine twice a year, send it to every school. We cover a wide range of anti-bias issues. This particular issue happened to be about faith, and it includes information, and we regularly include information, not just in this issue, but we cover world religions. We let teachers know, or remind teachers, because not every teacher knows. Most teachers would, if you ask them, they say, we can't teach about religion. Well, in fact, you can. You can't teach a particular religion, but you can and you should teach about religion and comparing religions in particular. A lot of bias incidents take place simply out of ignorance. And if teachers taught more about what religious traditions mean, kind of what means what and what doesn't mean what, we could stop a lot of incidents. This particular issue had this had a spread on combating anti-Muslim bias, and it's no secret to you, but observant Muslims are women in particular are an easy target, and there's something the scarf just does something to people. I don't know. But what needs to be done is it needs to be unpacked. People need to talk about it. So again, our strategy is to go through the teacher, educate the teacher first, because the teacher cannot interrupt bias or prejudice or kind of slurs if they don't know why a student wears a headscarf or what it means. They're ill prepared to interrupt when someone is being bullied because of it. And we do our best through photography too, to humanize the whole issue. I mean, these are students, we stress this to the teachers. These are students just like any other student. And we need to react to them in the same way. We have a program called Mix It Up at Lunch Day, and it just happened. We have an annual day, it just happened October 29th. We had over 10,000 schools participate in this day. And we provide resources and ideas for schools. We encourage them to encourage their students to sit with someone different for lunch. This whole Mix It Up is just about crossing social boundaries. It's about providing opportunities for young people to get to know someone else. Because human beings, all of us, we tend to sit with, congregate with, be with those who we think are most like us. And if students, young people, are not provided with opportunities to break out of that, and not just opportunities, but encouraged to break out of that, they won't do it. Oftentimes, when kids grow up in neighborhood schools, they may have lunch with the same kids they had lunch with since kindergarten, depending if they're all tracked together. And the same is true whether or not the school is racially diverse or not. There are always cliques. But this was a school in Dearborn, Michigan, which has the largest American Muslim population in the United States. These girls wanted their Mix It Up at lunch to be about talking to other non-Muslim students about who they were as Muslim women. And so over a lunch hour, they had table discussions, everyone talked, and kids, 30 minutes later, like, great, okay, when can I get one? They were friends. This happened in high school, junior high school, and elementary school. Look at these cute kids. And I don't know what happens in Tennessee, but in Montgomery and some of the schools, they're so restrictive. They don't even let the kids talk, So Mix It Up also provides an opportunity for kids to just be kids. And there's our leader, Morris. Kids will be kids. We always want to work with young people because, as I said, we believe no one is born with bias or prejudice. It's all learned behavior. And the good news is, because it's learned behavior, it can be unlearned. Teaching Tolerance, in addition to the magazine, we have lessons. We have lessons on just available for K through 12 across disciplines. There might be a science lesson that looks at sexism. There might be, a religion exercise a religion lesson that looks at religion through math. We just offer any number of things to get teachers to talk to their students about difference. This, though, Morris is standing in front of the Civil Rights Memorial. That's in Montgomery. That's in front of our office building. That's in front of, actually, the Civil Rights Memorial Center where I work. And the Civil Rights Memorial, it was designed by Maya Lim, the artist and architect who did the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Beautiful. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing. The table that the kids are standing around tells the story, some of the story of the Civil Rights Movement between 54 and 68. And it honors 40 individuals who were killed during that time. Water flows over it, and we remember. But on the wall behind it, there's a quote that's attributed to Dr. King. He delivered this line during his I Have Dream speech, known as his I Have Dream speech during the March on Washington for freedom of jobs. And most people know the end of the speech, the refrain around I have a dream. But in the beginning, started out really, really strong, They came to D.C. to demand something of their government. And Dr. King started out saying, no, we will not be satisfied. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. The rabbi, of course, will know, and maybe some of you know as well. This is a paraphrase of the book of Amos, or Amos. Until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. This is our charge. This speaks to myself and my colleagues. We see this every day. And I now share that with you and ask you not to be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful. Now, before I invite our panelists to respond, again, if you have any questions, please write them out on a card and raise your hand, and one of our organizing committee members will pick them up. And so now, in order to allow enough time for questions from the audience, I'm going to introduce our panelists and ask them to try to limit their comments to 5 to 7 minutes. You can speak from where you are if you'd like. I'll give you a microphone, or you can come up to the podium, whichever you feel more comfortable with. And our first panelist will be Berthina McKinney.
I'll take it.
Okay, here you go.
Good afternoon, everyone. I greet you with the greetings of peace in our traditional form. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Berthina McKinney. I'm the principal of Nashville International Academy, the local Islamic school in the Nashville area. We're located in Bellevue, in the Bellevue area, on the west side of Tennessee, or Nashville. This is my 4th year as the principal of the school, and prior to that I worked with Metro, Nashville Public Schools for about 7 years in the high school, teaching chemistry and physical science, so with a science background. Can't hear me? Is that better? Got it. Yeah. Is this better? It's the microphone. Okay, then I'll stand up. Hello? Yes, it's working. It's making me stand. So is this better? Yes. Okay, perfect. So do I have to start all over? Yes? No? Okay, perfect. So prior to working with the Islamic school as the principal, I worked with Metro for about 7 years. And I worked in the high school, Cambridge and Antioch High School. As a teacher, I worked as team lead and did some of the leadership things within the schools there. We also, I did also work really closely with several of the principals and the administration at the time during the time that they were forming dress codes for students as they implemented new dress codes within the Metro system. And we really worked to advocate dress codes for the Muslim population, specifically the girls. I've also worked as a liaison with parents within our community to go out and talk with school systems and schools related to different issues that have come up within the school system, to help parents and administrators and teachers find resolutions in some of the problem solving there. And then prior to that, I worked in early childhood for about 11 years. So it's been a long haul in the education realm, from babies all the way up through high school. So it's been an exciting task, and now we're back here. As far as this panel is concerned, I do want to thank Alicia Brooks. I want to thank Rabbi, I can't think of his first name, Shippo? Okay, for inviting us here and having us out tonight. I truly appreciate the privilege and honor to be here. And I appreciate all of you for coming out in the weather, as well as deciding between us and the CNA, for those who are CNA fans, to come out here. But back to the topic at hand, and I do want to round it up 5 minutes or less. Here we go. So back to the topic at hand, when it comes to bias within the schools, of course, within the Muslim community and within the Nashville, greater Middle Tennessee area, there has been a large or an increase in bias events and different things happening within our school communities. And our Islamic centers, local Islamic centers, and within the school systems are doing a pretty good job of tackling that, working to tackle that issue. Some school districts better than others are working really hard to tackle that. Also within the Islamic communities, there's been a lot of work within those communities to educate parents on their rights and responsibilities as it's related to the schools, and how they can get involved and better improve the relationships within the school to reduce the violence, or not violence, the bias that's being displayed in there, and sometimes violence as well within the schools. One thing that I would add, and a step that needs to be considered and really looked at, we have done education workshops with principals and administrators within the school system, but it has not been really trickled down to educators. And Ms. Brooks had mentioned, can't hear me again?
Right.
Is this better? No? Okay. Sorry. And Ms. Brooks had mentioned something in relationship to how we really need to educate teachers who are our first responders within those classrooms, because they're the first ones to face some of that bias and ill tolerance within the schools. If we could look at finding programs and different things within the schools to better educate educators and teachers on how to respond to those events, that would be an even better start to address some of these issues that we are facing. Thank you so much. I look forward to your questions.
Good evening. My name is Jeannie Kuba-Walker. I am a native Nashvilleian. I grew up here. My mother's from Springfield, Tennessee, and my dad's from Cuba. So I grew up in a very bicultural household and try to do the same with my own children. So I grew up in a Nashville that was very different than the Nashville we know today. So there's people in here I know are native Nashvilleians, but it's a different place than it used to be. But I have the luxury of being able to navigate between sort of the old Nashville of before, right, which is a lot of our front office staff in our schools, our secretaries and that sort of staff, and our new Nashville, which are a very diverse population. And so I feel very fortunate that I can also weave between communities, and it's really helped me to sometimes hopefully give a voice to families and students that otherwise wouldn't have that. And not necessarily just Hispanic students, but students who are not considered sort of traditional Nashville, if you will. My background is I grew up here, studied history, and then in Spanish, went off and taught high school Spanish and social studies in Seattle for 6 years, and then met my husband, and then he got a doctorate in San Diego, and we lived there for 6 years. And then he luckily got a job at Vanderbilt, and we came home. Or I came home, it's not his home. And so we've been here about 8 years, and I've been in metro schools ever since. I came back here and taught at Overton High School, a very diverse high school. For those of you that know anything about Overton, we have the largest refugee population, I would probably say, in our cluster, a cluster being a feeder pattern of any group of schools in Tennessee. I would argue that's probably the case. And so that was a great experience for me. I started a program called Spanish Heritage, which is Spanish for native speakers, at Overton, which is now all over the district in middle schools and high schools. And that really was a window for me into creating a space in my classroom for immigrant students to come in 1 hour a day and be among kids who are having the same experiences that they were having, and also studying literature, politics, poetry, music, current events from all over Latin America. So that's really what drove me to where I am now, which is working in community partnerships with families in metro schools. I left the classroom because I loved working with the families of my students, and I also worked a lot on high school reform. And so that's where I met Berthina. We were both sort of at the same time working on reorganizing our high schools around what are called small learning communities. And so one of the things I want to talk about, I was listening to our speaker, and I was thinking about and I often find myself speaking for a district of 83,000 students. In this case, I'm the voice for this district. And so, obviously we have a lot of work to do addressing issues of bias, issues of intolerance in our school. But I argue that our kids are really, by and large, much more tolerant than we are. That our kids, and mine included, have friends from many different countries and cultures and traditions, faith traditions. Not every high school is as diverse as the schools where my kids go and where I've worked, but I find that our hallways, and although they can be segregated, obviously, by groups where you're more comfortable, it's interesting to watch how students in Nashville, I encourage you to visit schools to see how kids are much more open to other faiths, other cultures, traditions than I remember being. They just have an opportunity for that. So I think about how we approach it as a district and as a community, and I really believe our students are a microcosm of our city. And so even though our city is pretty segregated and a lot of our middle and upper income kids are not in our schools, in our public school system, I feel like we are really trying hard to figure out how to help these children become prepared to enter the workforce, enter college. And we do that in lots of different ways. So so I was thinking about within the school structure and from without. So how do we do it from within? And so one of the ways we do that is, as I mentioned, high school reform. And so when we redesign high schools, what are called smaller learning communities, the key to, I think, any of these issues that we're talking about is relationships. If a student group of students has a close relationship with the teacher is going to advocate for them, be much more likely to understand where they're coming from, know who they are, and in many cases, hopefully protect them or stand up for them when things are not necessarily going in the favor of the student. But the teacher can actually be their advocate. So we also implemented what's called advisory, which is not a revolutionary idea, but somehow had gone away. It was the old homeroom, right? And so we have done that in high schools and now in middle schools, and that is a place where a group of 15 to 20 kids come to the same teacher, hopefully for all 4 years, with the same group of kids, and they build this little network. And there's a curriculum for that program and advisory, and I'm proud to say I helped write that. We used teaching tolerance materials to create that, right? And so I used teaching tolerance material all the time in my classroom as a special studies teacher, a Spanish teacher. But I'm proud to say we really try to incorporate a lot of the pieces from teaching tolerance in that curriculum. And we're doing that now in middle schools as well. And I would say, too, the other thing we've done is we have invested heavily with STARS, and with which is a business organization here in town that works closely with Oasis on working with students on an OVS, which is a bullying curriculum that is considered premier worldwide bullying curriculum. And so I have staff that are trained, they go out and train, teach routines on what is bullying, what it looks like, how do you address it, how do you change culture in school. And we're starting to see school events, students taking on leadership around this curriculum, students beginning to have demonstrations, marches, walks, events, pep rallies against bullying, discrimination, bias. It's interesting to see kids take it on and own that idea. And so that's really what we want, is we want kids to stand up, what is called in bullying jargon, be upstanders, right, instead of bystanders. And so that's what we're trying to build. And then the other piece I think is interesting to watch is how students use social media. So obviously we all hear stories about social media being used for ill, right? So students bullying on the internet. And my department, I have a lot of staff that work with families, try to train families on how can you be a knowledgeable sort of consumer of social media as a parent, help your children understand how to use it, within limits, and how to stay on top of what the latest trend is. But students also use social media for good all the time. And so you'll see, it used to be that information coming out of schools was very controlled by the schools. So now you'll see a school will have a website, but there will be 6, 7, 8 Twitter accounts for each high school that students manage, right? So you'll have the Overton Seniors, or the Maplewood Freshman Class, or the Maplewood Band, or the Pearl Cone Band. They have their own format for communicating with one another. And a lot of the language in those Twitter accounts is very uplifting. They're cheering each other on, they're supporting one another, they're encouraging participation in things, which is an interesting way to control dialogue. Obviously there's, stuff happening out there and we hear about it, the kids, not saying nice things on the internet to one another, but there's also forums for people to do the right thing. And so we see a whole lot of that. And I'm sure you know that there's a culture of service that didn't exist when I was a teenager, kids doing a lot of service projects and being involved in the community. And so the last piece I would say, which you have from within, right? We're working from within, training faculty, and then training students and hopefully changing culture, but also from without. We have organizations pushing us, coming in, trying to sort of push us in a good way, nudging us towards really having dialogue. And so we have, Dr. Register is our superintendent. He visits the Salahuddin Center, the mosque, the Kurdish mosque here. He was there the morning when they broke the fast after Eid at dawn. So he really makes an attempt to do that, and they make an attempt to come in and speak with teachers, invite student groups out to the mosque. We have tours to the Hindu temple. We have all kinds of engagement with faith communities all over Nashville. Our churches are very engaged in our schools in lots of different ways, which is a good thing. And they come in and they offer lots of kind of support and tutoring and mentoring and resources. And we also see the Egyptian Coptic churches now really engaged in our schools, helping parents, sort of guiding, shepherding parents, understanding how to navigate our system, and by and large coming in and helping us as staff understand what their cultures are about. And then we have refugee and immigrant organizations in town that come in and help us understand the refugee experience. And sometimes those are direct trainings for faculty. What does it mean to be a refugee from Somalia or from Burma? What does it mean to be a refugee versus an immigrant? And those are things that our staff needs to know, right? And then I think too, it's building the student voice, the student leadership. And some schools do that better than others. But I would say that we are constantly trying to keep up with students who really have found their voice in a lot of ways and are trying to help us sort of empower them. It's an interesting time to watch teenagers now. I still believe, people like to say, kids are not the same. But kids really are the same. Kids want to conform, they want to fit in, they want to be accepted, they want to be acknowledged. And that's true. I don't care where you go. I don't care who you are, where you come from. And so we just have to capitalize on that. So I'm anxious to hear your questions and look forward to it.
Can you hear me? Does that work? Okay, good. I'm always nervous getting up like this because I was afraid my foot was asleep, and I'm sure I would make it to the microphone. I came to Nashville in 1960. We had a mixed marriage. My mother was from Kentucky and my dad was from New York. And that was a cultural shift right there, so you know that. But I grew up, I'm a product of Metro Public Schools. I love Nashville. I love raising a family here, and I like the fact that I live in an urban center that feels like a small town. And I want us to be a part of, and I want to be able to contribute to that always being the case. And I want to talk just a little bit about that. Erwin mentioned I was principal at a couple of high schools and actually 7 schools, and so I've had a chance to really work all across this county. And the greatest blessing of my life was to be a part of the educational system here and to know so many families and so many people. And what I recognize out of that is that basically when you sit down together and you talk to people about what they want for their children and you get to the real heart of it, it's pretty much the same conversation. And as part of my last work before coming to Oasis, I worked at Peabody and taught there for 6.5 years. And I always like to tell the horror story of my last 3 weeks there, covering 35,000 miles in the air and working in Abu Dhabi and in China. And what I found there when I worked in schools and when I worked in people's homes is we all want the same things for our children. One of the driving tenets of the work at Oasis is that a core value of safety is there. We don't debate that. We don't always do well with it, but when you ask people who work there and when you look at the work that people do, we will be sure that everybody is safe physically, they're safe emotionally, and they're safe spiritually. And we stand by each other in protecting that right. So to talk to you about some of the wonderful things that we get to do, and I've been there 16 months, so I am just beginning, hopefully, to be a contributor to what is a long legacy of really speaking to the underserved and to pushing for social justice and for responding to crisis in the community by an organization. So 3 years, I'll get the time frame wrong, but 3 to 4 years ago, we had a wonderful event happen. Community Nashville's Building Bridges program came to be a permanent part of Oasis. How'd I do? Did I get that right? Because I was trying to see whether it was be quiet or go, 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 and I think it was go, go, go. Thank you very much. And as a part of that, we have Tasha here with us. We run 2 programs, Camp Mini-Town and Camp Any-Town. Now, I'm not going to try to give you depth on that. If you want to grab her afterwards, raise your hand, Tasha. She can give you all the details, probably the whole curriculum if you like. But anti-bias and bigotry, working with young people to understand who they are, to confront some of the historical tendencies that we all have from our upbringing, from the things that we have learned, the things that we have been taught vicariously and sometimes intentionally, and to confront those issues with the young people. Here's the challenge with that. It is a life-changing experience for most of the young people that go. Some go to Minitown, which is 3 days. Some go a full week to any town. The challenge is holding the adults who recommended them and holding the adults who live in the culture they go back to accountable for making sure that it's not just that young person that gets changed, but that that young person has an opportunity to affect the climate and culture they go back into. And that it not be an event, but it be something systemic. And that's our challenge. And that's going to be the next horizon. And that's the conversation we have anytime I can catch Tosh. And that's what we're going to be working towards. So that's one of the big thrusts for Oasis. And we had 1 camp this year, 2 camps this year, 3 camps this year. There you go. We're also working on our counting skills. I thought that was pretty good. So tolerance and understanding and having a responsibility for the climate that you go back into. And most of these young people are recommended from their schools. And it has to be all schools, because we all live in this city. The other thing that's probably big on the horizon Oasis is several years ago, 2.5 years ago, we had a young woman who said, I really want to work with the LGBT population. And she was so passionate about it, she gave up a very, very lucrative income to come and volunteer and work at Oasis, and now has worked into a job with us. And so when the young people were in the program were asked what they wanted to be called, they said, can we just be just us? So the Just Us program works for the rights and the conditions for LGBT youth in Nashville. One of the things that we're most proud of, and Jenny, you can take this back, is that we will be doing training for every middle and high school teacher in Davidson County Schools on how you create a safe classroom and how we build understanding LGBT youth in the public schools. Back again to that core value is that everybody gets to be safe. Part of the other work, though, is Pam works with small groups, but it's not just about that. Because if it was only about responding to the current need, we would never beat the odds. It's got to be about something on this end that changes the odds. And if you come to Oasis, you'll hear us talking about the programs that respond to crisis and the programs that change the odds. So what are we doing? We've reached out to faith-based organizations. What's happened from that? 20 plus homes have stepped forward and said, we will be foster homes for LGBT youth who do not have a home. Isn't that amazing? Understanding, tolerance, acceptance, and care, and everybody gets a safe environment. The other thing that's really one of the driving pieces for our work is that most of us approach leadership in terms of what skills can I learn from me so I can lead and tell others. And a lot of times leading becomes a conversation about telling, when it's really not. Leadership is really a conversation about serving. So leadership is best taught when young people learn to serve others. It's not a circle, if you will, that faces inward, but it's a circle that locks arms and faces outward. It's young people who know that going out into the community and making life better for somebody else is going to build a better bridge for the future. We do top training across the state of Tennessee, which is a program that trains all the workers who function in congregate foster care homes. And what we teach those young people to do is we teach them how to go out and perform community service. We teach the workers who work with the young people that there's a different way to respond. So it's about changing the odds down the road so that we're not trying to simply beat the odds right now. So our work here is about, yes, responding to the crisis at hand, but it's looking down here and saying, how can we change it so we're not having the same conversation 5 years from now? I want to say two other things, and then I'll stop. And you'll have to forgive me if this looks like a sermon, but it's my Southern Baptist background. It just happens. There'll be no invitation or offering, those who are saved. There are two events that happen in this city. One is going on right now, and we're in year one of a big thing, and I'll tell you about that in just a second, because I want to challenge you. I want to leave you with a challenge. Every year, Oasis works with a group called Teens United, and it's working with all the international populations in our city to function as a part of Celebrate Nashville. How many of you win? Oh, man, we got to work harder on this one. Celebrate Nashville happens every year in Centennial Park. And what I said to our staff was, what I want to know is at the beginning or the end. Because it ought to be one or the other. It ought to be the beginning of a movement in the city to recognize and celebrate the amazing diversity that has brought Nashville to be the kind of city that it is. Or it ought to be the culminating activity of a year of celebrating the amazing diversity of the kind of city Nashville is. So if you didn't go this year, you need to be in Centennial Park next year. And you need to find out what you can do to foster the understanding that diversity brings to a city and help harness the power that comes from that diversity. The other thing is there's a conversation going on in the city about what's Nashville going to look like in the next 25 years. How many of you are participating in Nashville Next? All right, that's great. So far we've talked about transportation, we've talked about housing, we've talked about infrastructure. But you know what we haven't talked about? We haven't talked about core values. Because it will be the core values that drive where the housing goes and where the transportation goes and what are the movers of the things that happen in terms of the kind of city that I want to leave to my children tomorrow. So when we talk about the fights that we have over the stuff that happens right now, it's usually the stuff that's just right now. I think the conversation we ought to be having is a conversation about legacy. Housing ought to be where folks can afford it. It ought to be where people can get to their jobs. It ought to be where people can have the kind of living environment that they want. And this conversation about Nashville Next can be driven by the citizens of Nashville. What I was most disturbed about in the meeting that I was in yesterday, it was not a diverse group of folks, either racially, culturally, or economically. So what do we do to provide true access for all the voices in the city? That's the last piece that I'll say to you, is one of the things that we talk about constantly is what's the difference between simple opportunity and true access? Simple opportunity functions most middle-class kids really well when it goes to applying for college. Genuine access is when you take a young person by the hand and you don't let a letter from a registrar that says they still owe $2,000 keep them from getting to college. And that's our story that we tell at Oasis about the young lady who came in with the letter on a Friday afternoon for the Tuesday after she was to report to the university. Two of our counselors drove her to the school, took her to the registrar and the financial aid office and found out what the letter really said, something she couldn't understand because she didn't have that long-term caring adult in her life, was that she hadn't given them all the paperwork on all the scholarships she'd given them, so they couldn't validate where the extra tuition money was coming from. She owed $600 at the end of the day. We wrote the check. She paid us back by the end of the semester, got a Perkins grant in January, and she's in her second year of the university life. She'll be a first-time college goer. I'm interested in all the children in Nashville having those kinds of experiences. That's changing the odds. Come see what we do at Oasis.
So I'd like to thank Alicia and all our panelists, and now we have time for some questions. And after questions, we'll have an opportunity to sit outside, have some refreshments, and talk some more. I only have one question here, unless others are there. You can get them to me, I'll be happy to ask them. And question goes to Alicia, and that is this. The majority of hate groups seem to be whites hating some other group. Why are there so few hate groups, if there are, whose members are people of color?
So that would require a really long history lesson, but I'll just say, yes, the vast majority of the groups that we identify as hate groups are overwhelmingly white supremacists in nature. But we also categorize them as they may be anti-Semitic, they may be anti-gay, they may be anti-Catholic. There's any number of things that interest them, but at their root, they're white supremacists. And something in the white supremacist ideology, it's based on hate, right? Why aren't there more people of color who belong to hate groups is kind of how I hear the question. If we look at the system of power in this country, even though we have shifting demographics, it's completely clear that the power base lies with whites, right? So I often kind of use this analogy. Some people are familiar with Idi Amin in Uganda, right? Remember how kind of he kicked out all of the Indian people and the people of color and all that. So racism can happen from one group to another, but to have this whole kind of notion of supremacy that guides a country, you have to be in charge of like everything and have to have the power at your hand. Plus, and sorry, that was a little bit rambling. The country was founded on white supremacy. I mean, I just don't know how to say it without giving you a full history lesson on white supremacy and how it came to be. There was no white before it was created in the United States, so that they could establish some supremacy. It's a really long and interesting history. There's books about, when Jews became white, when Irish became white. Very fascinating information. Very, very, very good stories. But I just can't. We just don't have the time right now. Sorry.
Jeannie, you made, in your comments, you used the term bullying, and we were here to talk about hate and bias in our schools, so I'm wondering from the panelists whether in your minds you make a distinction between bullying and things that happen in schools that we characterize as hate or bias based upon what we call in the law being a member of a protected class.
I guess.
See if that'll work.
I guess I would characterize bullying as a manifestation of behavior that sometimes can be derived from the bias or intolerance that a student may have. But sometimes it's just it's an issue of power and imbalance of power. We call it imbalance of power. Give somebody more power over another person. But for me, I see that as, well, we'll go back to the notion of safety, right? Where a student doesn't feel safe. Whether it's I don't think this is on.
It is.
It is on? How about this one? Really close. Okay. So bullying obviously is the term of the day, right? And so people are constantly talking about bullying. I mean, I think it's always existed, right? It exists in the workplace. It exists in all kinds of places. But I think the fact that it's a conversation that is really at the surface right now in schools is probably a good thing. But I don't know if I've answered your question, but I think that we have, bullying can come in many different forms, right? Gender, religion, race, language. It can even be within grades, right? Or within a team or a band, right? It can happen in lots of different formats. But it boils down to we want to create a climate that's safe for all kids. And a place where kids can stand up for other kids and say, that's not okay. That we're not going to tolerate that.
Okay. Alicia, the question was whether or not the Southern Poverty Law Center has state affiliates or state organizations.
No, we're a national organization based in Montgomery, Alabama. We have offices in Jackson, Mississippi, New Orleans, Atlanta, and Miami. But our base is in Montgomery. And we do work primarily across the Southeast, and that's because that's where we're from, and there are not a lot of advocacy groups in the Southeast. because I want to tag on the bullying versus hate or bias. It's exactly as you said, and I think that bullying is kind of like the word of the day, and then people forget about hate crimes and hate incidents. Now, hate crimes and hate incidents don't need a particular target, and bullying really is, I think you'll agree, about someone who thinks they have power and they perceive you as having less power. That's the dynamics of bullying. And there is no, and I'm glad you pointed that out too, that we can all engage in bullying behavior. There is no bully. No child is a bully. A child may engage in bullying behavior. And so it's really important to know, because when we begin to identify kids as a bully or a kid as a hate crime perpetrator or any of this kind of thing, then we lose the desire to help them. We victimize them. And so I just think it's important. I really believe in the redemptive, possibilities for anyone. I've worked with hate crime perpetrators, worked with people who have bullied, all of that. And we never want to, we don't want to lose anyone. We want to have safe and inclusive schools and communities for everyone. People act out in bullying, people perpetrate hate crimes because something is going on with them. And so there's just so much we need to do to heal the whole community. So it's not about identifying who are the bad players in our community. It's about really helping and building and nurturing our whole community, because we're all a part of the community. Those people that we say do bad things, and those who, of us who, are nice and do good. We're all a part of the community.
Well, we actually have on our panel here 3 individuals who are or have been associated with Metro schools. So we had some discussion about some of the things that are being done. What are things that are not being done that need to be done in our schools? And Bertina, perhaps you can talk also about that from the private school perspective.
Okay, do you want to address what's being done in the school?
Well, I think that's what he's saying.
Okay, what's not being done. Well, I'm in the private school area, and we're in Islamic schools, and we're the only Islamic school in the Nashville area. As a matter of fact, in the state of Tennessee, there's 4. There's one in every major city that we have, and that's the extent of the Islamic schools within the state of Tennessee. So with us, particularly in Nashville, we have done, within our school, we have started doing a job with our middle school students, our 5th and 6th. We currently go through 5th and 6th. And in the next year or so, we'll increase it to 7th and 8th. But with those 5th and 6th grade students, we are creating partnerships with other private religious-based schools on common themes, so that students can come together and learn about one another's culture based on sports, or based on food, or based on prayer, or different things like that, so that they can learn one another's culture and how they identify that. Because we are, we're within our framework, we do teach our religious values in the school, but we also want that other component, because as our students leave our school and enter the public school system, or they enter other private non-religious based schools, we want them to be able to go in there with the strengths of tolerance and encompassing others and identifying with others, not in a negative manner, but definitely in a positive arena. And how to cope and deal with those things that they may experience going in. So we have started those partnerships, and as a matter of fact, one of our focuses is coming up this Thanksgiving. What we want to do is kind of create a brunch for our students to partner with other faith-based organizations or schools to create that venue. Within the public school systems, Jenny could speak to that more so. But some of the things that when I worked with Metro at the time, and again, we have done a better job within Metro to improve that. But one of the things that we had, I was one of, within Cambridge, I was probably the only Muslim teacher within the school. So that created a venue for me to go in and educate teachers about some of the experiences that they would experience with Muslim students related to prayer and relationship and interaction and how those things look within the school system. So I basically worked with teachers and created an open classroom so that teachers and other working professionals could come and ask me those types of questions. Well, other schools that don't have that necessarily that opportunity to do so, or that venue to do so. So having someone in the school to facilitate that was an advantage. I've also gone into other schools to also help facilitate that, to help educators understand those differences and be able to respond. Again, we know what Metro School is very diverse, 149 different languages. So translators aren't easy to get either. And that was another thing that we worked with. If you know, within the Islamic faith, we are one of the most diverse groups. Arabs are minorities, just to put it out there. We are one of the most diverse groups in a religious faith. So finding translators within our faith to kind of help talk with parents and go out and work with parents was also another advantage going in there. So how do we relate to parents and refugee parents, particularly on their rights and responsibilities within the school system? So we worked a lot on educating parents and working with teachers to help relate to parents to identify the needs and concerns that they were having within the schools. So.
Okay. I just two quick things. I think we can do a much better job on training faculty on sort of having more cultural competence and being able to have difficult conversations in classes about differences in a way that's productive. That's not an easy thing to do with a group of kids. It's really not, and so most of the time people opt to not do it at all.
Right.
And so, like a Trayvon Martin conversation, that was probably a very difficult conversation to have in a classroom. I'm sure many teachers opted to not. I remember when the O.J. Simpson verdict came back, and I was actually in a high school classroom, and it was split right down the middle on that verdict. And I really wasn't prepared to have the conversation. I had to, we had to do some reading and thinking and come back and facilitate a model how you have that dialogue. And I think teachers need to be trained to do that in an era where testing and all of that is so important. It's really hard to find room in the conversation for that. And I would say, too, helping staff understand, and this is the work that I do most of the time, understand how to partner with parents that don't look and act like that. And so that is that's something that we have an obligation to do better, I think. And so,
Oh, well, I would be happy to leave it at that. I don't have a dissenting view on that. I would caution something, and this is the way I felt when I was working in schools. Right now there's really only two places that everything good and bad in our society shows up, and one is schools, and the other places is the internet. And I think that before we simply decide that the answer is just all lying in schools, then as a city, as a culture that supports schools, we have to step up and be very active in that conversation. So yeah, it is about training teachers, but remember, teachers who come in with their own biases and their own beliefs, and they come in with a heavy charge to meet a political model right now that's all about economic productivity and test scores. And like it or not, that cuts some of these conversations, which are so essential to growing the kinds of young people we want to grow. It cuts it away. So simply to answer this, and I'm not paraphrasing you, more of this on the schools, more of this on the schools. I think, again, I'm back to my other piece about values and belief conversations, about the kind of city we want, the kind of schools we want, the kinds of things we want to have happen, is finding how we can become very active in and being sure that we do those things in schools, but that they don't happen just in schools. They happen in our faith-based organizations, they happen in our communities organizations, our civic organizations. They be driving conversations that are not isolated just to events. They become a systemic part of the way we live. So I will tell you that, when teachers are being faced with so much, yes, we do want the right kind of people dealing with our children. but we also want to give them a reasonable task to do all that we ask them to do. So I'm not saying we don't need training for teachers. We do. I can tell you some of the hardest conversations I had were bringing a teacher in the office and trying to explain to somebody who had a very different philosophical viewpoint from mine why they couldn't say some of the things they said, and trying to make that a learning moment as opposed to just a moment of reprimand. Because it's easy to do the reprimands, it's harder to build the learning moments, because I wanted something better the next time for the next child. But to me, one of the challenges is, I mean, my youngest is 30, but I now have grandkids that will start school next year. I have just as much responsibility to want to see positive climates in schools and everywhere else as a grandparent as I had when I was a parent. And I can't really advocate that responsibility, I guess, until they bury me. Maybe I won't do it then. I'll come back and haunt somebody. But it's being able to do that, keep that kind of conversation alive and being a part of those places. And, you know, it sounds like I'm giving a parent-grandparent participation speech for schools, but I really am. Because what we all believe and know is that all of the initiatives that you see out there everywhere pale in comparison to creating better relationships between teachers and students that are built on understanding and care and concern and tolerance. That is the only silver bullet out there. There isn't any other. And I don't care what educational initiative you find, they will all have a shelf life. This is the only one that's going to make it better.
So, the last question. Please share, when you were doing your PowerPoint, you had a bunch of checklists on it. I think the first point in your checklist was to talk about schools having a bias plan. And I'm sure that information is in the materials that are outside that is available for everyone to take before they leave. But perhaps you can talk a little bit about what it means to have a bias plan.
It's really a bias response plan to recognize that bias occurs, and then and to know when it does occur, this is how we're going to respond. Just being prepared to respond, really. Also, and if a bias incident never happens, it's supporting the students at that school who are fearful that it might. Because students they spend an awful lot of time at school, but they're not just at school. They hear information, they absorb the media, they read reports, they hear things. And so we enter these places thinking you're a target sometimes. So schools need to be able to respond to that. And in the unlikely event that you're a target, this is what we're going to do. And kids, you can increase the feeling of safety, emotional safety, just by having a plan. And if you never have to use it, that's beautiful. But you showed that you cared enough to say, if this happens, we're going to respond, because this is not the kind of community that we want. We're an open, loving, whatever you want, however you want to frame it. So I want to say that. I know you should say one question, but I got to jump on the relationship thing. Vital.
Absolutely.
Absolutely vital. The relationship that a teacher has with their students will guarantee academic success or ensure academic failure. People talk a lot about academic failure or the achievement gap or any kind of way they want to look at it. Children are failing because they lack relationships with teachers. And one of the things that we're trying to do to offset that in teaching tolerance is to provide these cultural competency models. Because kids, and we have an increasingly diverse student population. I showed you the demographic charts. The teaching profession, and please don't think I don't like white people, because I love white people. The teaching profession is still about 70 to 80% white female. I used to be a teacher. I'm all about love for teachers. I love teachers. But there's that mixed match, right? And also, not only is it that cultural mismatch, but we live in more segregated, hyper-segregated communities than we did, you know, since Brown v. Board. Kids go to more hyper-segregated schools, more black and brown kids who are in poverty go to schools with black and brown kids in poverty. The Nashville is no different than any place else. And the teachers that teach this population don't live anywhere near them. So they don't know anything about them. All they know is what they see on TV. And oh my gosh, you know, they can barely like talk, oh please don't beat me. You know, I mean, I'm telling you. So what we try to provide is this information and tell teachers, this thing called culturally responsive teaching. If you can't connect with a kid, and I'm not just talking about black kids, I'm talking about a Muslim kid, I'm talking about a refugee, I'm talking about every student that teacher is trying to reach, there has to be some kind of, something to hang a relationship on. Not just student-teacher. And that's the thing that students hang the relationship on, especially students that come from diverse populations, I mean not, you know, U.S. citizens or new to the U.S., is there something on their home culture. So you just have to have a little bit to make them feel comfortable and connected to the teacher. They just need a little bit. But they really, really, really need it. We often talk about, I'm U.S. born, and, you know, yeah, it would be lovely if everyone had the same U.S. experience and had the same framework, but we don't. So what are we going to do? Are we going to do what we need to do to reach out and share that experience with everyone, or are we just going to play a guessing game with school? Well, you don't get it, you can sit over there. And that's what happens in classrooms. The ones that can make a relationship with the teacher are doing that, and then, you know, 3/4 of the students are sitting there checked out because the teacher can't make a connection with them. So send them to Oasis, send them to camp. Yeah. I'm serious. Send them to, you know, have your parents go. Parents can be terribly important because once a parent is empowered, or once a grandparent is empowered, schools will change. And the same thing goes for independent schools. And you know, I appreciate that you even come, because oftentimes, at least in Montgomery, where we have more independent schools than, you know, again, that started in 1955, you know, with Brown before. I'm not lying. The schools are, the Montgomery public schools are 95% African American. Half the population is white. So, there goes one thing. I'm so sorry.
And I want to reiterate real quick. I'm American born as well. Grew up in Indiana and not necessarily the deep South. So it was a learning curve coming from Indiana to Tennessee, definitely, being in the Bible Belt. But you know, I like to share my husband and I's experience. My husband grew up in Knoxville, Southern Baptist. Went to a Catholic university, University of Notre Dame, and became Muslim. So that's diversity within itself. I grew up, I was born and raised Muslim. My father is an imam, or a Muslim pastor. So I grew up in the tradition, but I also went to Notre Dame, Catholic University, and then I moved to the South. We've been married since our junior year of college, over 20 years.
Where is he?
He's back there. Yeah, and so people always talk about, well, we need to create interfaith, we need to create connections within our community and all of that. Well, I'm a result of that. I'm a product of that. We live that every day. My husband is a twin. His brother is a Baptist minister. So, you know, you look at those dynamics and we kind of live community all the time. We look at engagement and how to relate with one another, and we raise our children to understand that these are our values, but these are the values of your family as well. And these are the values of your community members and all of that. So when we came, you know, one of the questions I asked my kids, so what type of biased things have you ever, or intolerance have you faced within schools, you know, as a Muslim student going in? Well, they were kind of prepared before they went in. So things that would affect others didn't necessarily affect them. So they, you know, so it was those types of things. Now, if we can share this with all of our students, within all of our communities and all of these things, look at how our world would be such a better place. And create such a value system within here so that when we see differences, they don't spook us. They don't scare us. us. They don't want us to act out with racial slurs or with intolerance or with bias within our communities. So that's one of the things that we consistently look at. On top of that, we've also adopted. So we have a Hispanic girl, one of my previous students that we adopted. So reaching out into the community and saying, okay, let's take these kids in and let's help these kids. Let's not leave them there. So we've also adopted, and we've had our share of pulling kids in that we've helped within the community. It's our duty, it's our obligation. Not just me as a Muslim, and that's my obligation. It's me as a human being and the human rights of others and our obligation to our community to make our community a better place. I'll leave it.
Great. Please join me in thanking the family of Abraham plans to have similar programs in the future, and we invite your participation. We encourage you through your faith community and civic organizations to which you belong to involve yourself in meaningful interreligious cross-cultural engagement. Our children travel through many institutional settings in their journey to adulthood. As parents, teachers, educational administrators, and concerned citizens, we all have a responsibility to guide them on their journey in such a way as they become productive citizens. One part of being a productive citizen is to understand and appreciate that our country is the destination of many who have come here from other places for many reasons. Our country remains a beacon of democracy throughout the world, drawing many from societies and cultures different from our own. The strength of America is its ability to absorb those who come to its shores and in the process enriching and strengthening itself. It is our responsibility to welcome those who come to our community to share in all that is great about America. We cannot be afraid of that which is strange to us, and we need to help our children learn about those who may be different from us, engage them on a personal basis, and lead one another to active participation in a vibrant democracy. We need to work together to strengthen our social fabric through education and personal engagement and reject the fears that arise from stereotyping the unknown and unfamiliar. Thank you for coming tonight, and please join us for a reception in the area outside the chapel.